Okay, welcome to this research season event, the British School of Athens Artist Talk by the returning resident Elin Karlsson. Just to note, this is being recorded. Elin Karlsson is a Swedish artist based in Sussex, UK, and a PhD researcher at UAL. In 2021, she was awarded a funded residency at the British School of Athens, part of an ongoing and recently renewed collaboration between BSA and UAL, in which one of our practice-based PhD students spends 2 or 3 months working at BSA with accommodation and studio space provided. Elin's work centers around sculpture and writing, but also engages with textiles, drawing, and photography. She is particularly interested in violence experienced in intimate relations. She continually seeks to define the domestic as unsafe and threatening, using her personal experience and perspective as a starting point. She has come to describe her work as bodge, as it often appears rushed and fragile with undertones of aggression. In this lecture, Elin will speak about her experiences at the British School of Athens in the autumn of 2021, but also about working from home during the spring that year, when the residency was initially meant to have taken place, but was postponed because of COVID. The talk will touch upon topics such as autobiography, childbirth, lactation, desirability, weaving, and domesticity. I'm delighted to welcome Elin Karlsson to give this lecture. Over to you, Elin.
Thank you, Malcolm. As Malcolm just mentioned, I went to Athens last autumn for a residency that was originally planned for spring 2021. And the circumstances around that postponement, to me, pose some interesting questions. And that's where I want to start this talk. I'd like to share my reflections on that postponement that has made its way into my thesis. It's all sort of circumstance, and the travel restrictions in place last spring had a peculiar impact on this residency that felt quite meaningful within my thesis, which, as Malcolm mentioned, has a particular focus on violence, fragility, dependence, and bodies that I sort of work with and view from my perspective. So through my research, which is now in the writing up phase, I've come to learn that in this practice-based research, there is meaning in the circumstances around every part of the practice, really. And my response and reading of those circumstances have often been important in understanding my methodology. I suppose I'm turning over every stone. And recently I've started to look at these really carefully, and I've started to see something. It's the relationship between myself and power, how I respond to power, and how I respond to being powerless, how I respond when I'm unable to act. The memories, important memories that are held around not being able to act, around freezing when facing violent acts, or going blank when threatening situations. So I tried to set out to Athens 3 times last spring. Each time travel restrictions meant that I couldn't go. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the order in 2021 to stay at home and work from home, which was in place. And of course, there were exceptions to this. And I'm sure you're also all aware of this. Anyone not being able to carry out work from home could go to work and therefore also travel. And travel for study or research was permitted. So I was sure that that meant that I would be able to go to Athens to carry out this residency and do my research, which was at a very important stage last spring, where I was kind of just wrapping up years and years of work and sort of writing the thesis, really. Anyway, so further into the circumstances around this residency I go. I had a child in June 2021. Some of you might be able to hear her in the background having a bath now, but she, of course, is very much relying on me, and even more so a year ago, for nourishment, comfort, and I can't bear the thought of leaving her either. So she had to come with me to Athens. And because she was coming, so too was my husband, as he would need to look after her to enable me to do this work. And that's really where the problems kind of started for me. He was not allowed to travel with me. And this is by the government, I should say, of the UK. Well, it's maybe not, it's not that black and white really. He might have been allowed to come. For instance, I was told during a phone call with the Department of Transport when I was trying to figure out what the actual rules were around this, that he could come if I hired him to look after our baby. That would give him a permitted reason to travel, i.e. work. He could be the nanny of our child in Athens. And I realized that all of this is uncharted territory. I think we saw it a few times during the pandemic. Legislation made up kind of on the fly. And this is perhaps one of those times where the rules don't really reflect life or the circumstances or conditions under which people carry out their work. And I'm keen not to hold on to any sense of injustice. That really isn't the point of this anecdote. When I work, I'm reliant on my family and those around me to be able to do that work. And me and my husband have a well-oiled collaboration around making my work and working together on my residencies. But really, I wasn't sure that was something I would be able to succinctly explain to a police officer at Heathrow Airport during COVID lockdown. Facing that imaginary power, the legislative, the resource superiority of the police and the staff at the airport, I decided to postpone. Suddenly the fact that I was lactating as well as researching, looking after a small child, completely restricted my abilities to do this research. And I seemed stuck in this force field of power, which sure is partially imaginary. Foucault points to the periods of breastfeeding as illicit in terms of sexuality. Lactating removes the person from sexuality in this desexualized state. The individual is entirely powerless for, in my instance, produce knowledge through research. Foucault points out that this stems from now sort of historic approaches to bodies and sexuality that is gradually changing as we approach equality and acceptance. But maybe at this heightened time of pandemic and societal crisis, power structures and hierarchies reveal themselves through this refusal, through the no, through the lack of permission. I was presented with a choice between remaining a domesticated breastfeeding mother or step outside of that as a researcher. A combination of the two seemed impossible, at least outside of the home. And looking at Judith Butler and her ideas around codependence as important in developing an equal society, I find that my experience of attempting to take up this residency also revealed a lack of space for codependence within some of these hierarchies. The exercising of the physical and mutually life-affirming bond between me and my daughter, the breastfeeding, was pushed back into the domestic. So, armed with some of this frustration, during the summer in 2021, I wrote my thesis, or I completed the sort of draft thesis at home. So by the time I went to Athens finally in October, I'd completed my draft. So instead of being a period of intense exploration prior to sort of writing this draft, when I arrived, I already had a sort of resolved project, a thesis. So I found when I was in Athens, I worked more calmly, but it was also quite an isolated experience. I worked slower. I was a little bit unsure. And in a sense, the residency in Athens became about editing my thesis. And that really meant working in a new way for me. And of course, in a practice-based PhD, the editing also includes the practice. So now I want to move on to tell you a story. So I'm going to go into the slideshow on my screen here. So I had built my proposal for this residency around some key items in the Athens archive. And I suppose the one that I want to point out tonight is Emily Penrose's diary. So Emily Penrose lived in Athens during the late 1880s, and she was the daughter of the first ever director of the British School at Athens. She went to gain a university degree in classics from Oxford, and she was a suffragette and did really important work for women's right to gain university degrees and to do research. And although I arrived in Athens, like I said, with the thesis draft, I was of course very compelled to look at her diary. My thesis is partly fictional writing, and women, especially historical figures, have found their way into my narrative. I've found people that I lived through for a little while, whose stories resonate with my worldview, who I might be able to borrow something literal from, who I can look for a clue on what to do next and how to act. So Emily's diary is initially pretty much illegible to me. I can only make out key words. I understand that she sketched and she went to the Acropolis to do so. And of course, so did I. She attended her father's lecture on the Temple of the Olympian Zeus, which she comments were very successful. And I went to sketch at the Temple of Zeus, or the columns, as Emily often calls it, because back then, as today, this is all that was standing. Most Sundays she goes to church, that much I can tell from her diary. But I'm particularly drawn to the pages where I can read some distraction or something of who she was outside of what is written, as I do struggle to read it. The smudges or missed words, the corrections when she realized she's made a mistake and crossed words out or added words in, like if you look really carefully up here on their Sunday, she's missed out church, so has sort of just put the word in at the end. Or in the first few pages in the actually the order of the days wrong and crossed them out and rewritten it. Most Mondays, Emily goes shopping with one of her sisters. I can make out Alice, but sometimes she also goes shopping with her mother. So when I went to Athens, we stayed in the Kolonaki area of Athens, right around the corner from the British School on Swedish Street. As I was traveling with my family, that was the best solution for us. It turns out Swedish Street that we stayed on translates to Sweden in Greek. On a Monday, the 26th of October, we were heading back from town, back up the hills towards Kolonaki. We'd been out shopping. We happened to be standing on the corner of Syntagma Square. The square was constructed in the early 19th century, and syntagma is Greek for constitution. When a noisy parade of people was coming towards us from the northwest. So I said, let's watch the parade. We'd watched several during our stay in Athens, right around the square, in fact, a Georgian celebration and a Muslim prayer meetings. But as the parade came closer to us, I noticed that the crowds weren't happy, but angry. In fact, it wasn't a parade. It was a protest. It was a march. The crowd of people were waving black and red banners, and they were surrounded by horse riding police and walking police in full armour. And they were coming closer to us. The protesters were loud, chanting and amplifying their anger with megaphones, and they were getting, and we were getting pushed back towards the wall of the Athens Plaza Hotel. And that's when the officers let off some bombs with tear gas, quickly filling the already fuming Athens, or I should say fumy Athens air. The parade exploded within seconds, and people were running with banners and megaphones in every direction at once, including into us. We managed somehow to push our way through the oncoming crowd of smoke and run up onto a side street, and it was one of the most exclusive ones in Athens, with Louis Vuitton, Prada and Gucci shops. And I ran ahead carrying my baby, pushing her face into my chest. I took a right and then another right into a small arcade. I ran as far as I could into that arcade, with the smoke following us. I was coughing and my eyes were streaming with tears. And we ran over this slippery marble floor until we reached Ombre Aperitivo, an exclusive wine bar nestled in the underbelly of the Hotel Grand Bretagne. This hotel has got a very fascinating history. It was first finished as a hotel in 1874, so would have been, I imagine, on Emily Penrose's way home from shopping on Mondays too. During the Greco-Italian War in 1940-41, the hotel housed the Greek general headquarters. And when civil war broke out between the Greek army and the communist resistance who controlled most of Athens, the hotel became the scene for a conference between the Greek government and a British delegation. The Grand Bretagne was a combination of fortress and refugee camp, with machine guns set up in the entrance, windows and hallways, while the rooms were given to those without a permanent home. A recent review in the Telegraph gives the hotel a rating of 9 out of 10, noting that the only drawback of its location is that the Syntagma Square is sometimes overrun with protesters. So we entered the Ombre Aperitivo and the door was subsequently locked behind us. For the first time since I was in the square, I looked up to take in what was around me. I saw we were in an ornate, luxurious room with 8 other guests, 2 waiters, and I felt a tremendous sense of relief to not be in the fumy riot outside. Grateful for the calming, soft contemporary jazz that was playing. To my right, I had a group of 4 guests who had run indoors from the outdoor seating space. They were raising their bucket-sized glasses of Italian red wine, celebrating the fact that we had escaped the majority of the smoke that was nonetheless silently seeping in under the gap between the floor tiles and the glass door. A damp towel was put down. We ordered some drinks, which were brought over by the waiter with a complimentary small plate of snacks, as I finally found enough calm to sit down in the chic space that had been ever so slightly stirred by the commotion outside. 2 completely separate worlds, but only meters apart. Not long after, one of the people from the group of 4 drinking Italian red wine came over. She was concerned for the child, so wanted to know if our daughter was doing okay. She reported back to her group in Greek that our daughter hasn't suffered from the tear gas. The Greek lady asked our child's name. Evangeline, I said. and she let out a gasp and proclaimed that her name too was Evangeline, something that the Greek Evangeline took as a sign that the universe had brought us together in this place, in ombre aperitivo. And I couldn't help but agree with her that it seemed as if we were meant to have ended up there. Realizing that we were visitors of Athens, our Greek friend Evangeline apologized on behalf of the rioters. She said that these things never usually happens here. She explained the police had followed and shot lethally a man from the Roma community on the previous night. But she said we could stay at the Ambro Aperitivo for a drink. We would be safe here, under the Hotel Grand Bretagne. Our Greek friend was upset that the wing mirror of her car had broken. At this moment, I see that we slipped between observing one political persuasion to another. On the one hand, the company in the wine bar, like I said, Evangeline, the Greek, annoyed that her wing mirror had been broken in the commotion of the riots, and the protesters speaking up against police brutality, a form of institutional violence which in Greece seems to be targeting the Roma community especially. Something that's been frequently noticed and loudly protested in the last few years, but symptomatic of a long-standing institutional racism that we are painfully aware of. The victim in this case is Nikos Sambianis from a Roma settlement in Sophos, 19 kilometers northwest of the city centre. He leaves behind a pregnant wife and 2 young children. Once we decided to head home, as calm had once again reached the streets outside, our Greek friend Evangeline assured us that the rioters would not be in Kolonaki, insinuating, I think, that they would not bother to make it up the hills. Is there meaning and narrative there in Umbre Aperitivo? It seems we might as well have been in the opening sequence of a play, which in the next part might discuss privilege, about safety of the institution, about being in a society that cares for you, that values your life and wants you to do well. It might be about taking refuge within an institution and the work that you can do from within that to challenge what you are in fact benefiting from. On this night, we did not let the plot play out of a meeting that was perhaps meant to be. Exhausted, I felt almost too tired to make it back up the hill as night fell. But in this research, conversations that haven't been had in real life is allowed often to take place within my fictional writing. So now this leads me on to the next sort of topic of this talk. Who am I in my writing? I can't quite decide who to be. I think I am sometimes my teenage self, some kind of ideal self, Courtney Love, Julia Augusti, the daughter of Emperor Augustus, Emily Penrose maybe. I'm becoming enraged, becoming a father's fantasy, becoming a mother. So in my thesis, subjectivities that are so precious to me, as I feel I lose myself when I face power, are created through writing the self. The self is partly created through a series of indescribable experiences that sometimes seem as if they exist outside of language. Some experiences that are so horrific that they're outside of language. But in my writing, I want to tell the truth, but written down truth becomes different from the lived reality. It becomes edited and rewritten. Social anthropologist Carol Rambeau explains that I write myself, I edit myself, interacting with the self that I wrote by objectifying it, judging it, and rewriting it in response. An orthoethnographic methodology decenters authority and offers a sort of sketch of life with gaps and uncertainties. And in my thesis, I asked the reader to step into the memories with me, because I need your companionship, understanding, and attention. And maybe if you come with me, this time you can protect me. And besides, it's too lonely here in this place, in this city on my own. Though I appreciate the space, I didn't come here to be isolated. I came here to create. And thinking about the self as layered and merged with stories borrowed from others, perhaps there's a purpose of moving away from the focus on the individualistic self and achieving connections with others, creating dependencies and shared vulnerabilities that could be a starting point for equalities. So I drew a lot when I was in Athens, and I made these drawings with a continuous line, only lifting the pen from the paper occasionally and always without looking at the paper. And a lot of these were monoprints. I sketched at the Temple of Zeus, the Forum, the Acropolis, all of the places that Emily Penrose mentions. I'm trying to find a way into her life, apart from through the mistakes that I've noticed in her, or corrections that I've noticed in her diaries, through the archaeological sites that she visited that probably look the same today. At least I know that the columns do. Like I mentioned earlier, the research in Athens was postponed, and instead of going there, I built a loom in my attic. And this is another thing that I've wondered about. So instead of going to Athens, I popped through the loft hatch into my loft, where I could work in short bursts before the oxygen seems to run out, because I was getting a headache. I constructed this weft over an old clothes rail that I'd stashed up in the loft some months before. It felt like a good size, and I knew I could fit it down back through the loft hatch if I needed to exhibit it somewhere else. And around this time, I was in fact approached to contribute work to the British School at Athens 20th anniversary exhibition that opened in July 2021. And so I proposed showing the weave. So let us think about the weave and about power. Deleuze speaks about weaving as the interlacing of two beings. It seems that we could think about weaving as coexistence of the weft and the warp that together creates the fabric. I thought of the way that life seems to be woven and bonded in layers, but Deleuze isn't so sure. In fact, he says that the interlacing is a stranglehold. The two beings are, according to Deleuze, more in battle than in union. The weft and the warp are continuously fighting to be on top and dominate the other. Reflecting on this time, I took part in a research project run by Vanessa Ma, who's at the University of Brighton, focusing on kind of meeting other academics and highlighting the reduced research output of particularly of female academics with caring responsibilities following the pandemics in 2020 and 2021. Through this project, the weave that I made in the loft, the milk and Athens became embroidered in a patchwork, and you can see my contribution here, the white square. My section contains a spraying breast house with a ladder poking out through the loft, and Acropolis on the other, kind of breasty hill in the distance. And I should mention that the studio in Athens at the British School there is fittingly in the loft. I carried on weaving in Athens. I found a table. You can see the table legs here on the scrap heap at the bottom of the garden, behind the hedge, near the caretakers and gardeners, Dimitri's workshops, or one of his workshops. So he kindly gave me free rein to help myself to the spare bits of old furniture that he had lying around. And this is one of my favorite materials to work with. I had brought with me to Athens some black thread that, as I thought I might have embroidered rather than drawn at the Acropolis and the Temple of Zeus and so on, but I could use the black thread to make the warp instead. And the white fabric is borrowed from my daughter Evangeline. I cut up her muslin cloths to make some thin strips that I could weave with. But I think within my research that the weave is in fact the sail. And I think that the image of scrap wood that I put up here right at the entrance of the British School at Athens is in fact the mast. Because the sail has found its way into this research too many ways for me not to think about it as meaningful. They are also at the works that I exhibited at the portico of the British School at Rome. These three sails, the full rigged, soaked and bruised in appearance, wobbly and frail yet kind of erect, and accompanied by these little caves and islands that spread a gentle light over the scene. But the sails also seem to talk about objectifying, about violence and about painful. Oh no, it seems like the formatting has gone a bit in this slide, but I'm going to read it out to you. So it's just a quote from my fictional writing, and it says, Julia ties a man to the top of the mast and sees beauty in his still limbs. She adores how the sun reflects on his skin and contours of contorted muscle paints in the shading. They cross the Mediterranean. So with this section, I imagine a man's limbs splayed and tightly tied with ropes, naked, catching the wind and giving the sailing boat speed, arching his back in the pool. The body completely objectified and reduced, yet finding usefulness to move the boat forward. Probably in pain from the ropes, while the mild sea air tickles and warms the skin. The view from the mast is amazing. The sail is also in the original loft weave, I think, the one that I exhibited at the BSA anniversary exhibition. It's the colour, the shape, hung over the loom. I think it invokes a less direct sense of sail, perhaps, but it's got a rope built in, coming out like an umbilical cord from the place right in the centre, just below the breast, like knob that is there on the left. Maybe also a handle. Yeah, anyway, I think I'll stop there. But I understand we have time for some questions now, and I'll be happy to take those.
Thank you, Elin. Malcolm?
Many thanks to Elin for a really engaging and profound account of both how research is conducted, but also a kind of live writing of that research with the postponements in travel, the engagement with the history of Emily Penrose, the riot, the bar, the drawings, the weaving carried on in 2 countries, the sail, Rome and Athens, all combining in this really rich account of her stay at the British School of Athens. So thank you so much. The think of there was a sentence that really kind of stuck in my mind when you said a society that values your life and wants you to do well. I mean, that could relate, or rather it should relate to a university. It should relate to the British School of Athens. It should relate perhaps to a city like Athens. It should relate to countries and to the world. And we know that it's very sad that it doesn't. But nonetheless, that doesn't stop us aiming and trying to
Absolutely.
live in those kinds of societies. So thank you so much, Elin. And I think we will stop there, not take questions, but we will, sort of carry this through and for other people to listen to and engage with. So thank you very much.
Great.